we're going to connect it to this time that we're in. You know, how do you pull out from the feeling in life when everything is just going the wrong way? Everything just turns to the negative right on us. And everything seems like it's falling into pieces. Everything is going bad. How do you expect someone to stay optimistic? And more so, is staying optimistic correct? Maybe it's not wise. Maybe it's actually naive to stay optimistic. You know, as an example, when someone is in the concentration camp, God forbid, he sees his mom, dad, brother, sisters getting killed and many Jews in front of his eyes. And he still has trust and he's still optimistic. Is it normal, or it's just being naive to be optimistic in such a harsh, terrible circumstances? As an example, the belief in the coming of Mashiach. We've been waiting for him for close to 2,000 years. And our belief in Mashiach is still strong. Nothing shakes us. All the bad that has happened to us, we still are strong in our belief in the Mashiach. Even while the Jewish people were walking to the concentration camps and they were walking to the gas chambers, they still said, Ani ma'amin b'amunah shalema, I believe with my full belief in the coming of Mashiach. Again, is that naive? Or that's the right behavior? We've seen by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the leader that came post, he did not stop believing in the coming of Mashiach. His belief did not get weaker over years. His belief was not weakened by anything. Nothing weakened his belief. The Rebbe's belief in the Mashiach in the 50s as it was later in the 90s. So the Rebbe went through 2 world wars, survived Soviet Union, escaped from the Nazis. He witnessed many heartbreaking losses of our brothers and sisters in Israel. Nothing waived his belief in Mashiach. He spoke with the same passion for over 50 years. Now the question is it realistic? Are we being realistic when, God forbid, everything's falling on you and life seems like it's just not going the way you would like, and you're still being optimistic? Maybe it's time to give up. Maybe it's time to just turn down on life's situation. So we find ourselves in a time where traditionally it's a defected time, so to speak, or it's a difficult time for the Jewish people. We're soon going to enter the month of Av, next Wednesday, in exactly a week. It's a month where a lot of tragedy happened to the Jewish people. There were 4 big things, then many other things, but 4 large things that happened on the 9th of Av, which is going to be in approximately 2 weeks. First of all, in the year BCE, 1312 BCE, when the Jewish people were in the desert, they finally left Egypt. They finally left the slavery from Egypt, and they're about to go to the land of Israel. And then the spies go into the land of Israel and say, it's a terrible land. You can't go into the land. There's giants. It's dangerous. And they come back with this negative report. On the 9th of Av, Hashem gave the negative news to the Jewish people. And he told them that you guys are not going to enter the land. You're going to die in the desert. Then, can you imagine what kind of feeling that is? Can you imagine how horrible the Jewish people felt? Then in the year 420 BCE, the first holy temple, which was built through King Solomon, was destroyed through the Babylonians. The third thing that happened in the year 70 CE, the second holy temple was destroyed by the Romans. Many decades later, the Romans plowed over the ruins of Jerusalem. It knocked out any chance of it being of Jewish survival. All of this happened on the same day. Now, the Talmud says bad things happen on bad days. You know, if everything happened on this day, to find a reason to be happy and optimistic is kind of tough. You know, how are you supposed to be happy and optimistic in such circumstances when you see the Holy Temple was destroyed and all the hardships that we have been through? The temple was destroyed. Just go through the history over the last of what happened in the last 2,000 years. It's horrifying. And sometimes it could be very depressing and very sad. Well, we find ourselves just about 70 years from the Holocaust. And you see that the Jewish people, the revival of the Jewish people in Poland, it's not it was before the war, but there's many synagogues and there's kosher food in Poland and many other places where the Nazis have been. Which I see we have revived. Of course, it's not flourishing. You know, the way it was, the way it was before them. But there is hope. Look at the flourishing of the Jewish people in Israel, in America. We've sort of came hope rising from the ashes, as Elie Wiesel said. But how does someone manage to consistently have trust in such tough times? Is it possible? Is it justified to consistently have hope in such horrifying circumstances and horrifying times? Well, we find an answer to this by discussing the beginning of our Torah portion. The Jewish people were 40 years in the desert. So the Torah starts this week's second Torah portion and says, these are the journeys of the children of Israel. That's what the Torah says. These are the journeys of our ancestors in the desert. Now, wait a minute. The verse says, these are the journeys of the children in Israel. Then it lists the journeys. The Torah doesn't only list the journeys, but it also lists where they camped. 42 stops where they camped. So the Torah says, for instance, they went from Mount Sinai and they went to a place called Kivrot HaTa'ava. They went from Kivrot HaTa'ava, they went to Chatzerot. But if the Torah is busy speaking about where they camped, why did it say these are the journeys of the Jews? It should have said these are the campings of the Jews. That's the main thing that we're talking about. We're talking about the stops. And why is the name of the Torah portion journeys? It should be named camps. Stops. Or at least it should be named journeys and stops, not just journeys. Well, let's first understand what is it telling us about these stops. The Torah is not just a book of. Who cares where the Jews stopped? What do we care that they made 42 stops and where they were? Why even mention that? Well, the Baal Shem Tov says that in our life, we also have 42 stops. From the day we're born till the day we pass, we have 42 stops, 42 campings. The day you're born is like leaving Egypt, and the day you pass is like entering Israel. There's a lesson we could learn from each stop. For instance, one of the stops is called Kivros HaTaiva. Kabbalistically, it means you bury your pleasures. You might have inappropriate pleasures, you bury them. That's kivrot. Chatzerot means a yard. Another stop is chatzeros. What does it mean? Life is only the backyard till you finally reach the home, which is the world to come. Again, lessons that we from each stop. In our life, even though you don't do 42 journeys every day, 42 campings every day, but spiritually you do. From the morning till the night, there's 42 different steps you're doing every day. Whether it's saying Ma, whether it's putting on tefillin, whether it's doing a mitzvah or giving charity or helping others. There's 42 different campings. If God gave you another, that means that you could go higher than the way you were yesterday. Why else would God give you another day if he doesn't expect you to reach the heights and much higher than you were yesterday? So if you didn't put on yesterday, today is maybe the chance to start putting on tefillin. If you didn't keep kosher, maybe today is that chance because God is giving you another day to move on. Maybe this Shabbos is the chance to start keeping Shabbos better. It's a lifetime journey. You might be tired. You might be exhausted. Wouldn't you think that from time to time you should be able to take a break from your travelings? Enjoy your achievements? Well, the Torah calls it journeys, not travels. Even though they're compared, a journey and a travel is the same thing. However, travels mean you move on. You move on also psychologically from where you were to a higher level. It's different than the way you were before. You know, you move from floor 1 and then you go to, let's say, the 50th floor. That's completely different from the first floor. You move in life from, let's pick the example of not keeping kosher, and then you start keeping kosher. It's a huge step. That you would call a journey, not a travel, as we're going to explain soon. It teaches us you cannot settle for your accomplishments from yesterday or even your accomplishments for today in the morning. When you accomplish to move on, that means you have the strength to move on even further. So if you achieved going here, that means you could achieve going even further. It's like mountain climbing. You climb the mountain and you are going up the mountain. You finally get to one peak and then you realize there's more to go and you're motivated to continue climbing. When you finish climbing the tip of the mountain and then you go down, you say to yourself the next day, you're so motivated to do mountain climbing again. And that's how it works. The more you do it, the more you want to keep doing it. And the same thing should be in our spiritual life. The more Torah you study, the more you want to study. You know, spirituality is different than physical pleasures. Physical pleasures, no matter how much you enjoy eating, once you're full, you're full. Can't eat anymore. You're stuffed. You know, pleasures could last a certain amount of time. You like a certain drink. Once you're done drinking, you're the same. When it comes to spirituality, the more you do it, the more you want to do, and the more you're able to do. The more you study, the more you want to study, the more you start liking it, and you want to go more and more. The same thing is in our lives. You cannot sit down and relax because of today's achievement. You have to consistently move on and on. And now we understand why the Torah calls it journeys and not campings. Because you have to constantly be in a journey. You have to constantly, consistently be traveling. You know, when we said before that you cannot rest and enjoy your achievements, of course, if not, you don't have strength. But the vacation is not a destination. We look at it like a pit stop, meaning it's temporary. You know, you could be in a hotel, in a nice fancy hotel, and there's two couples staying there. There's many couples, but let's pick an example of two couples that are staying in the hotel. One couple stopped because they're on their way driving, let's say, to New York. So they stopped in the hotel. Their destination is not the hotel. It's just they stopped to be able to continue traveling so they could rest up the travel. So the entire hotel is only to be able to move on. Then there could be another couple that it's their vacation. They're utilizing it as their vacation as it of its own. They're not necessarily focusing on where they're going afterwards. They just came to relax. They came to relax. Now, of course, they're relaxing and then they're going to have more strength to move on in life. Because they're right now, this is their stop. The Torah speaks about the campings as pit stops, and that's why it calls it journeys. Of course, you work hard and you want to have a vacation, but the vacation is only to be able to move on and work and succeed and invent and accomplish. A vacation is not a purpose of its own. Going on vacation your whole life does not become enjoyable. You want to work and you want to feel accomplished. So the stops are for the journeys. And that's why the Torah calls the camps, the campings, they call them journeys. Because the stop is for the stops are not a purpose of its own. Till now, we discussed on good stops throughout our lives. And instead of looking at them stops, we look at them as journeys to go up higher and higher. But as we said before, what's with the times in your life? What do we do with that? How do you call that a journey? What's if your life is, God forbid, filled with problems, health issues, wealth issues, mental issues? How could you look at it as a journey? How do you expect someone to be optimistic? How could he continue traveling? You know, you're traveling to work and you get stuck at every red light. And every minute at the red light, you're sitting upset. You're late to your appointment. It's so hard to think in your mind that every stop is restful in order to move on. But the truth is, every red light is good. It keeps the road safe. And guess what? It maybe keeps you safe so you can rest. Stopping, you have a break for 2 minutes from driving. It's part of the journey. It's not negative. It's not a setback. It's part of the process of your journey. Now, whether it's very painful in your life, whether you have circumstances in your life that are very painful or not extremely painful, sometimes it's hard to look at it as part of the journeys. But this is our job. You could be driving to work, and God forbid you had an accident, or you got a ticket, you got a traffic ticket. Of course, it's worse than a red light, but look at it as part of the journey, part of the challenge. Someone might enter a hospital, God forbid, for whatever reason it is. And all of a sudden they made friends with a person next door to them in the hospital. Oh, thanks to the fact that they ended up in the hospital. Any detail. There can be many things that came out good because of the situation. There was an individual.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, but your example that you just gave about the red lights, so you can take that same road every day. So I'm going to always take 95. And then you can say, you know what, I'm going to use Waze and go another way. So which one is, have faith that, well, today there won't be traffic? Or do you take a step and say, I'm going to go in a different direction? So I think it has to do with
what I'm saying is, if you ended up on a road with Waze and with the best directions and you still got red lights, you have to learn from something. There has to be a lesson from the red lights, whether it's relaxing time or realizing. First of all, it also shows on sharing. When you stop at a red light, you give someone else a chance to go.
But if you take the same way, you can say, you know what, I'm just going to take 95 every day. I'll deal with the traffic.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong to use Waze. but then a lot of times you use Waze and you end up in traffic. It happens all the time.
Right.
So news reporter actually recently, in January of this year, Benjamin Hull, if you heard of him. So he got shot, or he got the middle of the war. He was in Ukraine, and his friend actually got killed, but he survived. He became blind in his left eye and his left arm. He lost his left arm, he lost his leg or his legs. And one of the things he spoke about that kept him surviving was he thought the whole time about his family, how he's going to be going back to his family. And he had hope in his mind a whole time of the good times that are coming. And that's what kept him surviving. So in other words, in order to survive from a painful situation, it's very important to be optimistic in order to survive. Viktor Frankl said even further than this. Not only to set goals, but to find meaning in suffering. Viktor survived the Holocaust because he found meaning in the suffering. And the meaning in the suffering was important to his survival. Now, the Torah teaches us even further. Suffering is not only survival, but it's actually meaningful. By the way, this doesn't mean that we should ever, God forbid, ask for suffering. Ever think that this is the idea. No one wants to suffer. We're just saying if it already happened in your life, then you utilize this idea. But no one should pray for suffering. If there is suffering, the Torah point of view is that it's meaningful. Don't just think in your life what could have been worse. Suffering improves your life in many ways that you would have not improved had you not suffered. Every step in your life, even, God forbid, the biggest pain, moves you to places that you would have not reached. And before this pain, the traveling or the journey to reach higher would have never happened. Had you not had the pain, you wouldn't be where you are today. Pain is not only survival, but it's meaningful to help you and others. Frankl turned his suffering to a therapy. As we know, his book, Man's Search for Meaning, was translated to 35 languages. Before he died in 1997, it was translated. There was 10 million books sold. He was able to contribute to the world. Had he not suffered, he would have never been able to do this. Through his suffering, or after his suffering, he didn't just go back to the way he was before, the way he was before the war, but he went up higher and higher. And the same thing is by us. After, God forbid, suffering, there's no point to go back to the way you were before. The point is to go higher. And it happens many times when we have dramatic situations. We usually, when something dramatic happens, you will always encounter an opportunity that you would have not had before. Like I mentioned to you the example. He ended up in the hospital, the most terrible thing. But then he was able to get a best friend in his life. Like our ancestors in the desert. Look how horrifying it was for them when they found out they're going to be suffering 40 years in the desert. They were just slaves in Egypt. Finally, they left Egypt. They heard God's voice at Mount Sinai. They saw great miracles. All they wanted is to enter the land of Israel. But God said, no, you're going to stay in the desert. And not only you're going to stay in the desert, but you're going to die in the desert. Only your kids are going to go into Israel. How could they wrap their mind around this? How did they continue? How could they continue being optimistic? And they felt if Hashem put them in this situation, that means there's something to accomplish that they could have not done without it. What good thing did they do? They cleaned the desert. I don't mean they cleaned it from garbage, but they cleaned it from its physical state. They made it spiritual. They uplifted all the spiritual sparks. Every single sand that they walked on, everything that they stepped on was now uplifted to holiness. We know that every physical thing in this world has a holy spark that has to be uplifted. And that was the mission of the Jews. Had they not stayed in the desert, they would have not been able to uplift these sparks, and they would have been stuck in the desert. And their kids would have not been able to go to the land of Israel. So thanks to them uplifting these sparks, that led spiritually to the idea that they were able to enter the land of Israel. Now we understand that every challenge, beauty inside it, beauty and depth. It strengthens us to be optimistic. It's not naive, it's actually healthy. When the people during the Holocaust continued and moved on and they survived, we see many, many great people that came out afterwards. Even those that unfortunately died were still optimistic till the last moment, as we said before. The purpose is, the idea is to find purpose in the suffering. Not always will you find the diamonds in the ground, but it's much more common than you ever thought. So when, God forbid, went to the doctor for something very small, and then they discovered that they have something much larger, had they not gone to the doctor, could have been extremely dangerous. Someone had to join an AA recovery. It could be very hard and painful to overcome the addiction that you had. But then you realize, because of your addiction, you were able to help others. Even if you don't find the silver lining, but there's one thing you must know, that every night is followed by the day. Every dark moment is eventually followed by the light. The more the dark, the more the light. Even if you don't find the light, it will eventually come. So the Jewish people The setbacks, which is the camping in the spiritual terms, is part of the travels, the journeys. They did not call it, they call it the journeys because they're not setbacks. They're preparation to move on. So let's conclude the start of the class. How could you stay optimistic in the coming of Mashiach, to believe in the coming of the Mashiach, and to believe that he's going to come in every situation with all the problems going on in the world, the economy and terrorism and all kinds of things happening in the world? As we said before, the Rebbe went through 2 world wars, ran away from the Nazis, had terrible pain about everything that went on in the land of Israel, but the Rebbe was still optimistic. Nothing put him down. His belief was always strong as ever, because he saw the dark as a path to light. Already when the Rebbe was a little kid in Cheder, he said here in text number 8, the Rebbe saw that all the pain and all the suffering that we've been through in exile is in order to get to the light of the revelation of the coming of the Mashiach. And the Rebbe saw this. Even if you cannot see the silver lining and our suffering, you might never see it in your lifetime, but you know that you will see it by the revelation, eventually by the coming of the Mashiach. We will eventually see it. Sometimes we will see it and feel it. But when Mashiach comes, you will actually see the complete purpose of the suffering. In life today, situations maybe look really bad. But when the Mashiach comes, you will see the light. Look at these painful moments as pit stops, part of the incredible journey of life. Then you will see how everything will bring you to a good place. When you know this, even though you don't understand how it's part of the journey, the fact that you know it, it will bring you to be optimistic always in your life. You will see yourself marching to a better and healthier place in your life, to be happy and bring happiness in the situation. So even though we're about to arrive the most saddest month of the year, be optimistic. And as the Rebbe explained here in text number 12, it reminds us that however dark this exile is, never be in a situation that you give up. Never despair. Always believe that light is coming. The dark is in order to reach journeys. It's part of the journey. Therefore, in these days, you should add more in Torah study, more in reasons to be happy, which are allowed in the 9 days. Obviously, not music or things that are not allowed, but generally, we should enhance in our happiness. On the contrary, and this is us, that maybe you have moments in your life that are sad, even, God forbid, depressing. But the purpose of the moments is to reach heights which you would never have been able to reach had you not gone through that suffering. But our prayers are, and we pray that Hashem should give us good, and we should see the good, and we shouldn't have to deal, God forbid, with any type of suffering whatsoever. And that's why the name of the parsha is Maseh, which means journeys, because the purpose of the campings, which could be painful campings, are ultimately for the journeys. Any questions?
So, Rabbi, isn't it just a matter of like having like your core value and faith? I mean, the Rebbe was very positive. He would never use a word like deadline. He'd say due date, because that sounds more positive.
Yes, the purpose is to have your faith. Exactly.
Right.
Yes,
But
when you have faith, Yeah.
But I think you have to trust in your faith. I mean, there's a song called The Gambler, and the line is, you have to know when to hold them, you know when to fold them, right? So you have to like go with your own decision if you need to make a decision. But you see that all the time. If you just stick with your convictions and do the right thing and don't say, I should have done this, I should have done that, make a decision and stick with it. But I
Yeah.
was just thinking in terms of when you were talking, like when there was a famine back in Canaan, and Jacob decides to go to go to Egypt, because things would be better there. Then 4 centuries later, it's the land of milk and honey. So you could say, well, what happens if Jacob would have waited? Maybe he would have turned, but he made the decision, and 400 years later, we went back. But he had faith in his decision. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong. It's just like you believe what you're going to do. And there's an expression, faith is not what you know, but faith is about what you don't know, right? And you have to like just stick with your faith and don't lose hope. I think that's
Yes.
part of the message as well.
Yes, very good point. Shkoyach. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you. Okay.